Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil is the third and final chapter of the Darth Bane trilogy and brings an end to the plotline set up across the other two books. After the first two books worked surprisingly well for me, I was actually quite excited to see where Drew Karpyshyn went with the conclusion, and he really didn't disappoint with this one. There isn't too much to note on this book's creation that we didn't already cover in our previous entries, but to recap, after the first book was such a success, Drew Karpyshyn was commissioned to do a second and third entry to the Darth Bane series in pretty quick succession, and hence he wrote a conclusion to his trilogy with Dynasty of Evil. The story, much like Rule of Two, takes place a further 10 years after Path of Destruction in 980 BBY. Bane is aging at this point, and along with years of the obelisks tormenting his body, he's growing weary and tired, though he and Zana have done a good preliminary job at setting up the basis for the Sith as an organization again following the death of Khan's Brotherhood from the first novel. Bane finds it unlikely he will in his lifetime fulfill the Sith's ultimate quest, but as he grows older and weaker, he also starts realizing he and Zana's chance at a genuine fair fight is dwindling, with him fearing he will either need a new apprentice or Zana will need to challenge him soon. If Zana doesn't challenge him, that may lead to the death of the Rule of Two as it was conceived. If Zana wins by default, beating him when he's old, then the idea to continually make the Sith stronger and stronger generation by generation will never come to be. And while we know from the Darth Plagueis novel, Bane's idea was unsustainable, it was the driving force behind this decision in this novel. Regardless, Bane decides to use the teachings of Darth Undeadu, who learned how to use essence transfer, a Sith ability where Sith can take over the body of another strong being. This would allow him to either fairly test Zana, or would allow him enough time to train a new Sith apprentice to attempt to beat him in the future. Meanwhile, a Jedi Master Med Tandar is killed by an Itochi assassin while working on Done to settle some mining disputes, something the Jedi want to investigate further. Sarah, the Prince of Done, and the widow of the former Prince Girin, hears of the assassination, which is where some contrived coincidences are revealed. She was the banished daughter of Caleb, the healer from the first two novels, and her personal bodyguard is Lucia, the Gloomwalker sniper Bane saved in the first book. Regardless of that, the Doan Royal Circle fears that the Jedi may send a mediator in to investigate the death of the Jedi, since the Jedi was visiting Doan at the time of his assassination. So Sarah needs to head to Coruscant to meet with the Jedi Council to try to smooth things over with them before things get out of hand, though Lucia reveals that she was the one that hired the assassin to kill the miners and the Jedi as revenge for the death of the princess's husband. Meanwhile, though, Bane is looking for a Sith artifact from Argel 10, a Sith artifact collector who bought and sold the shit for being cool, not knowing what he had was more or less useless. Though of his pile of shitty stuff Bane doesn't need is a scroll that leads to Darth Undeadu's temple, where he once lived on the planet of Prakith. Bane plans to dip to the world to investigate, but sends Zana to Done to learn more on the death of this Jedi, which is more or less busy work at this point, though a more paranoid Zana isn't buying the story fully. She goes despite knowing that Bane is up to something, starting to deduce that Bane is getting frustrated with her for not challenging him. With Bane unaware, Zana is very ready, but biding her time until she has a new apprentice worthy of taking her spot when she finally murders her master. Regardless of this, she knows time is running out, and apprentice or not, the time has finally come for their fated duel. While this is happening, Sarah sets off with Lucia and meets a Jedi Oba, who trained Tandar, the fallen Jedi, in the Force, though Sarah is able to keep the Jedi off the fact that Lucia hired the assassin, noting that due to the presence of Sith artifacts at the crime scene, he thinks that Seth Harth, another of his former pupils, probably had something to do with it. Sarah, while at the temple, takes a tour and learns her father was killed by Bane, or seemingly Daravit, Xana's cousin, who was blamed for the killings. She doesn't buy it and believes Bane was probably behind the attack. Zana gets to Done and meets with the Dark Jedi that Oba was mentioning may have something to do with the Sith artifacts. Sensing some power in Harth, she takes him on as his apprentice, something he has little interest in, but knowing Zana could murder him pretty easily, and would if he declined, felt he had no choice. Bane makes it to Prakketh and manages to find Ondedu's shrine, where it is surrounded by hundreds of cultists, many of whom he slaughters to take what is inside, grabbing the Sith holocron and making it off Prakketh. Sarah tells Lucia that she believes Bane was the one who killed her father and takes her to Caleb's camp, where they hire the assassin that killed the Jedi earlier in the book to track Bane, hoping to capture him for revenge for what Sarah believes he did to Caleb. Bane learns of the essence transfer that he could use to get a younger, stronger body at the cost of his own. After this, Huntress shows up with a squad of troopers, and after a prolonged casualty-filled battle, she ends up capturing Bane and delivering him to Sarah. Zana heads back to Bane's mansion to find evidence of what happened to the Sith Lord and is determined to rescue him to find her place as Sith Lord, as Sarah begins to torture Bane, and Lucia recognizes him as the man who saved her and the other Gloomwalkers, Dessel. Though after some torture she learns that he is now Darth Bane and Dessel is all but gone. She still frees the man, though, that was once Dessel, as she wants him to flee and have mercy on Sarah. Though while this happens, Zana and Hetra arrive at the facility, having determined where he is being held. Zana hoping to find a way to slay Bane, Bane wanting to escape. Sarah tries to kill Bane at any cost, and Lucia is also trying to get to Bane, while also getting Sarah out safely, and Hetra saying fuck it and heading off. Huntress, the assassin, is also present, but mostly just watching the whole affair go down. Zana and Bane eventually do meet up and start battling, as Lucia is killed in the crossfire, and Sarah starts the self-destruct sequence on the prison, causing the dungeon Bane is in to begin collapsing. Sarah and Zana escape, with Zana's assault on Bane ending in a stalemate, and Huntress offering to be Bane's apprentice after seeing what happened in the dungeon. Bane and Huntress head to Caleb's camp, assuming Sarah would be there. Bane says if she had Caleb's skills and would use it on him, he would spare her, but Sarah says she'll never help him no matter what happens, and tells Huntress that the Sith will eventually lead to her undoing. Huntress says Bane holds the keys to her destiny, and Bane kills Sarah, though a bit reluctantly. Bane realizing that a game of cat and mouse with Zana would be futile, so he ends up sending her his coordinates to finally have the final battle. Zana arrives, though is hesitant at first to fight Bane, as with Huntress there, she fears the fight will be rigged. Huntress declares this isn't her fight and she wants to join the Sith, vowing her loyalty to whichever master ends up coming on top and ends up the new Lord of the Sith. The pair fight, which leads to Bane dying due to Zana's superior skill with Sith sorcery, though Bane initiates an essence transfer and manages to almost seize control, leaving a bit of doubt that Bane truly perished in the battle. Huntress takes on the name Darth Cognis and explains it is their destiny to battle to the death, as her and Bane just had. The book ends on Hearth, the Dark Jedi, who is learning the essence transfer from Darth Ondedu's holocron, and with that, the Darth Bane trilogy came to an end. Darth Bane is back, this time still kind of the secondary lead behind Zana, but he definitely has more of this book's runtime than he did in Rule of Two. Bane is grappling with Zana as his apprentice, growing older and starting to doubt Zana can surpass him in Force abilities, while he'll still put up a challenge. He did, after all, pretty much immediately get her following the creation of his Sith Order. The question is why Zana hasn't challenged him. Is it the comfort with her routine? Is she waiting for him to weaken? Or is she still getting her cards in a row? Regardless, if Zana doesn't challenge him soon, she will win the Sith Lord role unfairly, and thus water down the Sith ideologies as defined by Bane in the first novel. Bane decides he needs to learn the essence transfer from the ancient Sith Darth Ondedu, which, that name is kind of an eye roller. But still, he figures out this will allow a level playing field between he and Zana, or he could just say fuck it and take on a new apprentice if she turned out to bust. After meeting the Huntress, he finds his new apprentice in her, with Huntress, now Darth Cognis, standing on the sideline of the fated duel between Bane and Zana. Bane, of course, seemingly loses the duel. While the fate is slightly ambiguous, the story would never see expansion, so we don't really know for sure if the essence transfer did or didn't work. It's possible that part of his essence was past, all of it, none of it. It's never really explored. Zana, on the other hand, is prepared to fight her master, but in a way, Bane's theories were all right. Zana wants to take the reins when the time is right, but also needs to be able to physically defeat Bane and have an apprentice to begin their training after the battle. Of course, following the duel on Doan, it was clearly time for the fated fight to finally happen. She also tried to recruit Set Hearth as her apprentice, but his single-mindedness would always force him to work for himself and not the Sith as a collective, which seemed to ironically become much more the philosophy around the Darth Plagueis era, something that at the time of Bane and Zana didn't really make sense for the Sith as a strong new philosophy. Lucia is an interesting character primarily because she serves two purposes. First, to protect Sarah, and second, as a veteran of the Gloomwalkers who feels compelled to help Bane for what he did in the old days when they served together. Bane tells her that his life as Dessel has been gone for decades when he's in captivity by Sarah, but to square their debt, she frees him anyways, leading to her demise in the crossfire of Zana and Bane's first duel. I think Lucia is interesting, mostly as a reminder of how the story sort of started with this humble man in a mining village accidentally killing a Republic soldier and becoming a Sith soldier as a result. A poetic reminder coming shortly before the conclusion of Bane's story on how the whole thing started. Sarah is the daughter of Caleb, who after leaving him at his homestead happens into marrying royalty on Doan and holding a grudge against the people who killed her late husband, and this eventually leads her to the killer of her late father. She becomes ruled by hate and tortures Bane, not even wanting to kill him, just wanting to inflict suffering, not too far off from the Sith. Something at the end of the novel she accepts, knowing that she'll need to peacefully surrender to her fate, which would be the only true act of defiance against Bane that she could do and have any effect on him. I like Sarah's arc primarily since it shows the internal battle between light and dark, which as a theme across all Star Wars and not just something characters aligned with either the Jedi or the Sith live with. The moral being that serenity is often salvation in this universe. Finally, you have Darth Cognis, who is Zana's apprentice at the end, but initially is a hired gun for Sarah and Lucia that eventually falls into the path of the dark side as she brushes shoulders with Bane and Zana, but from the jump is sold on Bane's vision for the rule of two and doesn't try to sabotage the process of deciding the new reigning Sith Lord, who she'll learn under for the next several years before she has a chance at taking the title for herself. This book is again pretty dark, with everyone sort of bouncing allegiances. I think characters like Set Hearth add a bit of fun to the story, and I don't think it's nearly as overtly grim as the Rule of Two, though. I think many of these steps were necessary to take the story of Bane's life to the point of darkness and Sith legend that he's said to be in other media, and it doesn't disappoint. I will say Lucia is a bit of an asshole, just kind of happening into Caleb's daughter, and more or less only being with Bane at the end of the story by coincidence. For the most part, other than some convolution during the whole revolution and conflicts on Doan, this book is pretty tight and sound. And Star Wars always has the excuse of the old Will of the Force to be the be-all, end-all contrivancy cover, which only slightly bothers me, especially when the book, for the most part, works really well, as this one does. The prose in this novel are still good. Saber fights, force powers, and other conflicts are written with exquisite detail, with some of the best action in all of the Star Wars novels. Characters are well described, they add new and old characters to the novel, and I'm never confused what the book is trying to portray to me. It's just really tightly written and does a great job of ending this immaculate trilogy on a high note. At the end of the day, I don't think this is the best of the trilogy, but I think it has a lot of strong aspects, strong characters, and a good conclusion, really only held back by some convolution, but is about on par with Rule of Two. At this point, I think my favorite is definitely Path of Destruction, but if you like that book, you will assuredly like the other two novels in the series as well. I think much like the Heir to the Empire trilogy, gold was struck here. This trilogy has a unique tone, but it also fits well within the universe of Star Wars, and I think it added a lot to Darth Bane as a character, and took him from being a footnote in Star Wars' larger lore to a major Star Wars fan favorite side character, up there with other major side characters like Darth Revan or Cad Bane.